Okay,
Hi,
here we go.
Kristen.
Join me today on our podcast. Maria French is the creator and director of H&Co. She's a seeker of truth. She's a risk taker, a platform creator, and she's finishing up her doctorate. Hey, Maria, nice to see you. I know we're basically in the same town, London town,
Yeah,
but here we are, and like a lot of things during this time, we're connecting in these different technologies. So
for sure. Fine with
yeah.
me.
Yeah, that's great. It's too bad you weren't able to meet up with Barry and I in Soho. Although we did ask you while we were there, so that wasn't quite cool. But
Yeah, but you
anyway,
had given me like an hour. I could have worked it.
yeah. And you said you were doing something like rugby. Is that like a video game you
Oh,
play?
I live in rugby.
Oh, you're not playing rugby. You live in rugby.
I am like the least athletically inclined person you ever want to meet, first of all. But yes,
Wow.
I'm living in rugby at the moment.
I,
And
I
living is
wonder.
a very relative term for me, but
Yeah, but I wonder if there's a prerequisite that you've been able to meet or haven't yet satisfied by living in such a town as Rugby.
if there is, I'll never meet it.
Great. Well, that's fantastic. And where is Rugby in relationship to like central London?
North, um,
Okay.
about probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on traffic. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
that's driving. I can get into central London in 45 minutes on the train.
Okay. Not bad. Not
Yeah.
bad. Yeah. The public transport system in Europe generally, and even here in the UK specifically, or in England, is quite good. And especially when you, like me, grew up in the United States,
Mhm.
and there's really, I mean, public transport is pretty sad in the
I know.
US.
Well, you and I have something in common in terms of we both spent significant time in New York City. And
Yep.
so I grew up in New York. So after I left New York, I was like, what's happening with the public transport in the rest of the US? Because New York has it down, right?
Yeah.
But,
Absolutely. New
but
York
yeah.
is great. Yeah. You
And I
can get
love
around.
train travel. I find it really romantic. It's one of the things I love Europe, period,
Yeah.
in particular France. But it's one thing that I absolutely love about Europe is train travel. I find it utterly romantic. It doesn't matter if it's an old dilapidated train. I'm just happy as a clam to sit on one and just watch the world go by, speeding
I
by.
know, and it's exhilarating too on these high-speed trains in France and Germany. Not so much in the UK, although I think there's maybe a few, but they're not super high speed in the UK yet. But it's still romantic. I remember when I did my first backpack tour during college in '94, way back. I don't even, maybe even before you were born. I don't even know.
No,
And
I'm older than you think
okay, great.
by
But
a
I
lot.
remember I remember traveling around Europe and just how easy it was to, take the train, the Euro Pass, the Euro Rail Pass,
Yeah.
and I did that with a girlfriend of mine at the time, and it was just great. We could just travel. We actually took the Oriental Express from,
Okay, that is my dream.
yeah, not
Dream.
the whole thing. We
Yeah.
started in Vienna and we went to Paris through Switzerland, and it was an overnight, so we had their sleep car thing going on, and that was cool. I really enjoyed that.
Oh my God. Train traveling with like a lover is the only thing that's more romantic than train traveling by yourself. Because solo travel for me is quite romantic and I've done a lot of it.
Yeah, you are a digital nomad in a way, right? Is that the way to describe you? Like you sort of are nomadic, you travel a lot, you do different things, you're an educator, you're getting your DMin as
Yeah.
a minister, as I understand it, from California, someplace in California.
I'm getting my DMin actually through Cambridge.
Okay,
Yeah,
nice.
here in the UK. It's connected with Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. And
Okay.
it's obviously Wesleyan Methodist. I'm not Wesleyan, I'm not Methodist, and I'm really not like an institutional Christian at all. I have two masters and have pursued a lot of research interests in the past in continental philosophy and hermeneutics and all sorts of things. And I was really tempted for the PhD. I just didn't want to make the life commitment for the next 5 to 10 years. I
Oh,
had a lot of living I wanted to do in the
absolutely.
last several years. So, but DMINs weren't a great fit for me because it's executive church leadership, and that's
Yep.
not me or my career never will be. And so I found this program at Wesley that is partnered with Wesley House at the University of Cambridge. And it was a really fabulous combination of practical stuff and academic stuff. So I just went for it. Now I'm at the tail end of it. So
Wow, congratulations on that. And I imagine that kind of dovetails pretty well, not just with your lifestyle, but also with the kinds of work you do and maybe the future plans of how those platforms will unfold. And we'll get into that.
yeah,
That's really great. I
yeah.
actually was going to do a, a a MDiv at Duke, but I ended up while I was there my first year thinking, no, I think I'm going to pursue the PhD. And like you were saying, it's another 5-10 year commitment to do that. And one wonders if it's even worth it after putting all that kind of energy into one degree, especially given how limited the jobs are after your PhD. So it sounds like you're doing a great thing. And I love Cambridge. Cambridge is wonderful. I just swapped emails with John Rutter,
Okay.
he does the Cambridge Singers,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping to get together with him soon. So he's wonderful. I love the
You know a
choral
lot of really
tradition.
cool people.
Oh, I don't know.
I know
I'm
this
just
about you.
interested. I'm just interested in how people tick, like what makes them get up in the morning and just like risk something. And it seems to me like your life is a life, I think, filled with different kinds of risks at different times.
It has been the last several years, I think, of my life have been defined by risk taking.
And
I,
speaking of risks,
yeah.
I should congratulate you. Speaking of risk, I should congratulate you on your recent announcement of an engagement. You're getting married. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. So it's so weird to receive congratulations because um I'm once divorced. I don't know if you know that about me. And so that's why when I talk about my life and risk taking and everything I've done has been in the last several years since that divorce, it's like kind of BC and AD, like that divorce is what splits my life in half
Yeah.
down the middle.
Yeah.
And so the congratulations on getting, I just didn't know if I would ever get married again, if I wanted to. I didn't know what I even thought about marriage as an institution and, uh,
Totally.
legality of it and all the rest of it. So I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, I guess I'm preparing to enter into this very traditional construct once more, but very differently and very excited and in a way that is
Wow.
totally our own. And for our listeners, I know this will go out past next week. I'm getting married in a few days' time, actually.
Wow.
Yes.
That's really exciting.
We haven't even been engaged 2 months, but yeah, we're getting married. The wedding of my dreams, actually, which is a little city hall wedding, just us and saying our vows and making it what it is. And I'm going to be in, a little white suit, and that's kind of how I always. We're actually getting married in Stratford upon Avon, which is
No, we're
Shakespeare town.
Shakespeare.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very cool, old, like very Shakespeare looking building, Tudor
Wow.
style and all the rest of it. So
That sounds so wonderful. I 3 years ago, almost to the day on Christmas Eve, I actually proposed to um, a model actress in Slovenia, and she said yes. So we were going to get married, but that ended up not working out so well. But
that's
yeah, I
something.
mean, it's quite the leap. And like you, I also think of my life in some way as that big divide, that big
Mhm.
suture in
Yeah,
life of being married and then getting divorced. So I got married really early and I
same.
was married for 14 and a half years. And so then after that, I was like, okay, it's a new life in a different kind of perspective.
Yeah.
But you got married early, evidently, right?
I did. I got married when I was 24. My ex-husband was 29.
Yeah.
But for me, I mean, I can't answer so much for him, but for me, I just really wasn't in a position in my life to be making a decision like that. And I made it anyway.
Yes.
And part
Yes.
of the issue was, I was coming out of evangelical culture, purity culture, fundamentalism. And I was in my first years of seminary when everything was starting to be questioned. I wouldn't even say I was at the point of deconstruction at that point. And I have lots of thoughts on deconstruction in general, and
Yeah.
that word and how it's being used these days. But I was just in an amazing and massive time of transition. And looking back now, I should have never made a life decision during that time, but I did. And I
Yeah.
kind of grinned and bared it for 7 years when I knew
Wow.
pretty early on. This is the first time I've said this publicly, and I'm very comfortable with doing so. But I knew really early on that in our marriage that I wasn't happy and that it wasn't what I wanted. But I was so steeped. We were so steeped, and he was a good man. It's not like I could be like, he beat me. He's an alcoholic. He's this, he's that. He was just fine, just not for
Sure.
me, and
Sure.
neither me for him. But we were so steeped in our church and our Christian community, and we had these great Christian friends, and it was a relatively progressive church and relatively progressive ways of doing things in ministry. But I would have ruptured everything, and I did, and that's why it took me so long to make the decision. But
So that pressure, what you're saying is a lot of times that Christian culture, even if it's progressive, that creates a certain kind of pressure that I think maybe could undercut a real thorough and honest self-reflection about, for example, your marriage, or for example, your commitments in life and so on. And that kind of bubble pressure can be kind of actually, I have seen it be very dangerous, and for myself as well.
Mhm.
That sense that you have to, on the outside, live like you're like the astute, upright, self-righteous Christian, and and you fail to be honest with your own, like, what is it, my own desires that it maybe even God is giving you, but
Yeah.
you're not really reflecting honestly through what that means. And those institutions can, like marriage and other sacraments, can put that pressure on.
Absolutely. And, it was really kind of a conversation back and forth in my head of, even biblical principles of self-sacrifice versus self-preservation. And the self-sacrifice just, got way out of hand because I was growing more and more unhappy. And I would say that my hand was really forced to divorce because it was just a matter of I am utterly unhappy. There is just zero shred of happiness in my, when you're in a relationship with someone that is the central relationship in your life, you're living day in and day out with them, and that isn't working, and that's not happy, and you just keep pushing it, and it's like, I mean, how can anybody be happy in that? So that's
This
really kind of what forced me in the end.
Yeah, and it's really quite, I guess, I admire that struggle that you had to go through, and I'm sure it's taken years from that point where you're realizing, wait, my goals and my sets of principles and my desires for how I want to live out a certain life aren't engaged.
Yeah.
And I think that the doctrine of self-sacrifice um, can be beautiful for sure in religions, but it also can be extremely damaging
Absolutely.
and difficult. I mean, I've spoken with many couples. When I was ordained, I served in a church for just a bit, and older couples, they realize they're finally able to be honest after certain decades of being together, and they realize that maybe that life of being married and being committed wasn't really what they wanted at all, sometimes. So I wonder just what you think about that I don't know, that dialectic between, we should serve others, so there's a certain element of self-sacrifice for the good of, let's say, you know a community, but to what degree, and how do you measure that? Have you reflected upon that?
That is a great question, and it's a huge question.
Yeah.
I think for me, when I look at biblical narrative and when I look at the point of community and mechanisms of meaning and all these things, one thing that really, one major value, one major ethos that rises to the top for me is radical hospitality.
Hmm.
And just really kind of the simple idea, yet not so simple, of, dying so someone else can live. And that doesn't mean obviously stepping in front of a bus for someone else, but what does it look like to lift up the other before yourself? And I think that we can do that in really simple everyday ways without constantly self-harming. Because I
Hmm.
think if you're self-harming, it really defeats the purpose, because then you have like zero strength and zero ability and zero platform to do anything for anyone else.
So what you're saying is there's a sense in which, sure, we should radical hospitality. I like that approach, and there is a good sense in which we can give to others what we have, but to the point of giving to others where it starts to compromise our own health and our own ability to get up in the morning and go through the day in a more or less positive outlook, let's say. And then it becomes a problem. It starts to become a problem when it starts to undercut one's own desires and gifts that maybe God or they seem to develop over time. I mean, one of the things that for me, growing up in a relatively poor, challenging domestic environment was, I I didn't have the I didn't have the well the confidence of my intellect or my gifts and abilities were stifled just because of the environment where you're supposed to fit into that masculine sporto jock, as they call it in the States, kind of category. And that category, I think, uh, finally exploded when I was in the military after an airborne accident. And you're finally able to, I think, after these ruptures, after these a difficult time, even a tragedy, a loss, that you're able, that box sort of starts to shake and maybe even explode. And it's at that point where you're able to finally be honest with who you are and what your gifts are. When did you realize that you had gifts of intellect and gifts of developing platforms and communities? When did that start to percolate in your life?
Yeah, so I'm growing more introverted as I'm getting older, but I've always been super extroverted and I've always been able to rally people and lead. And since I was a child, I've always kind of had very decided opinions about things and always had this leadership quality. So, forming a following, forming community, rallying around something was something that came natural to me. Um, and just, being able to speak about things in a way that get other people excited. But I would say, because that was like the faith part of me and the school part of me and, even the Bible college part of me and all of those things. And, driven, of course, by, what I later understood as, exceptionalism and just kind of having to be clearly superior, because we're Christians and evangelical and we're better and those kinds of things. And God calls us to be standards. But I think in terms of the academic piece, when I was in seminary and started to get really excited about literary theory and hermeneutics and what it looks like to apply some of this stuff to scripture and the meaning we can get out of it, when I started studying narrative, like it was, again, coming early 20s, not even early 20s, fresh out of teens, where you would just open up the Bible and point to a verse and, what's Jesus speaking to me today? And then going to seminary and being like, actually, this isn't the Jesus and me story. This is the Jesus and humanity story. And there's a story here. And there are some things that we need to understand. I started geeking out over, John Austin and speech act theory and John Searle and, Umberto Eco and Wolfgang Iser and the implied versus empirical distinction. It just rocked my world.
Your category started to shake your worldview, if one wants to put it that way.
And anybody who would listen was
evangelized. You were the one who was like, let me tell you what I've just read. Yes, I totally get that. Yeah.
I remember sitting in an Old Testament class early on in my seminary days and hearing about how, the god of Baal, in ancient, Near Eastern Canaanite literature, literally, like you can read Proverbs and other wisdom literature of the Hebrew scriptures and see word for word ancient Canaanite literature copied or vice versa. And I was like, this is incredible, because for a lot of people that invalidates, ideas of inerrancy and infallibility and all of those things. But for me, it just affirmed that the story and the narrative that is coming at us from the pages was so transformative. And, there was this sort of intersectionality and this integrating of all of life and all of culture and all of the world. And it became less of like, hey, this thing became, what it is in a vacuum, and more about the human experience throughout space and time. And I just loved it. And I still love it. And I think that's why I still operate in the realm of Christianity, because this is where my story is. This is where my story has been since I was a child. So it's not a matter of, when I say post-Christian, I very much don't mean atheist or agnostic. And I don't mean Christian atheist either. I just mean past traditional forms of theism and past traditional forms of Christianity. And so it's just been, it's, I don't know if seamless is the right word, but has been a very interconnected journey where this part served me and it's no longer serving me or my community or the world in which I'm a part of anymore. And so I've moved on to the next thing. I'm told by our mutual beloved friend, Barry Taylor, that you are a big fan of Catherine Malibu and
Right.
plasticity. And
Yeah.
I am as well. And so
Yeah.
I think this concept of plasticity, and I don't know if you're familiar with Jeffrey Robbins and his work in radical theology, but he expands on Malibu's ideas of
Yeah.
plasticity and applies it to the plasticity of God. And again, just such exciting stuff for me.
Yeah, Jeff and I co-edited a book series we do with Zizek and Clayton Crockett at Columbia. So I've
Oh
known
no,
Jeff.
and I should know this. And I asked you if you even know him. Now I feel
Yeah,
stupid.
no, it's
I love him.
yeah. These are
I'm
the
a huge
kinds of
fan.
voices that I think can help. I don't know, weave that narrative as and it's not like top down. It's not like a worldview is set and you dial it up or you order it on Amazon and it shows up at the door and it's all good. But
Yeah.
rather, we live and move and we have our being, and sometimes we're contradictory, and sometimes we do things that are great, and sometimes we do things that we regret. And yeah, and it's much more of a dynamic interplay, and people like Jeff Robbins, and
Mhm.
that hearing you tell that story about the narrative and about linguistic terms with JL Austin, how to do things with words and
Yes.
thorough and things like,
Groundbreaking.
yeah, it is. That's right. But there is something of an intrepidation for me. I always fancied myself this early on in life, coming out of the army, as a kind of like Christian apologist, and I'm going to, knock down arguments against God and
Yeah.
show, and to pick up on a theme that you mentioned earlier about the exceptionalism,
Mhm.
that hubris position where you think because you are elected, that
Mm.
this God that creates the universe selects you, and then potentially this double selection, that Augustine sometimes talks about, or John Calvin, and doesn't select others to be part of the saved. And I think that those kinds of I mean, we know the dynamics of community building, this the outside, the inside, the
Yeah.
us versus the them.
Yeah.
And you build that up like what Trump does, and says, well, these are the enemies, they're coming after your houses or whatever. They're
Mhm.
and as a result, it builds that community, but that community is built around the cordon of fear.
Yeah.
And you have to ask yourself, you know what's at the bottom of how we're created as subjects and how we think. What do we fear? And it sounds to me like you getting beyond that exceptionalism, beyond that evangelical position,
Yeah.
takes a lot of guts, a lot of courage to get you outside that fear factor.
Yeah, well, it wasn't overnight for sure, and I had some help along the way. And it's taken years, and this will be a lifelong journey for me. So, but I think you're so right about the fear piece, and I think so much of fundamental understanding of religion is fear based. Existential fears about our own lack of meaning, fulfilling some desire we have inside of ourselves, which we know can never be fulfilled because we're addicted to the desire and we don't want it to go away. um,
Totally.
yeah, and then also, I get the strangest texts and emails from people. I have people who have long been outside of Christianity, or you have this dichotomy, theism and atheism, and you kind of have this back and forth, really boring dialogue, and it's so like past its sell by date. And I'm interested in the space past that, which is why I always go by post theism and post Christian. But people who have just wholesale left fundamentalism, evangelicalism, Christianity, and I'm atheist or I'm agnostic, and I just don't believe this, and this really traumatized me and really hurt me and abused me and all these things. But they text and they call and they say, I'm still really afraid of hell. Please tell me why I shouldn't be afraid of the hell that I no longer believe in. I get messages about, I've been outside of purity culture for a long time, but I'm still weighted down by baggage of my sexuality and what it should be and what it shouldn't be, and kind of the saint slut options for me, and
Mhm.
those kinds of things. So those narratives haunt, and they haunt for a really long time, and you have
Yes.
to be so intentional with just how you engage them. Just as an example, going back to right after my divorce, and this was like at the beginning of my post-Christian, post-theist journey. And I remember kind of sitting down in my little studio apartment. I was in St. Paul, Minnesota at the time, in Cathedral Hill, a neighborhood that I still love very much. And I was thinking to myself, okay, I don't think I ever want to get married again. Here I am, 6 years, 7 years later. I don't think I ever want to get married. Maybe I'll live with, I don't know what that looks like, but I need to figure out how I want to engage sexuality and sex
Mhm.
in my life.
Yeah.
And so, because it's like you leave that, and once you leave purity cult, it's like, okay, I'm just going to be wild and do whatever. And if that's someone's choice, that's okay. But it wasn't mine. I'm the kind of person, I really need to like think through, and I need to have sound, ideas and thoughts about why I'm making this decision, because I'll have
Right.
regrets if I don't. And so I embarked on a study. I I actually, created a whole independent study in my second master's degree about sex and sexuality through space, time, history, culture,
Yeah.
gender, all of these things. And and also most recently, this past year, I read. Do you know Victoria Brooks? She's a
No.
queer sexual ethicist. She's brilliant. She's at the very beginning of her career, and she put this little book out this past year called Fucking Law. And the whole idea of, oh, it's fabulous. I've talked about it so much. But the idea of fucking law is twofold. She says, first, we need to just tell law and philosophy and, like, the patriarchal white guys who've made it throughout, time and history, to just fuck off. It can just go screw itself. Just tell it where to go, because it's an embodied experience. It cannot just be like dictated to you from
Right.
the insides of someone's cerebral musings and functions. And also, law and philosophy and sexual ethics just needs to be good and fucked. Like, you actually have to fuck to figure out what you think about fucking. Like, that's our whole
Yes.
premise.
Right. Yeah.
And I loved it. And that's sort of, I think, the stance that I would, but I don't even know how we how we got
That,
on that.
but
Just
just to
thinking
carry that forward, because I think, aren't you teaching or in the midst of teaching a course on sexuality right now? Or
we
yeah,
finished. Yeah, we do these culture courses every month. We do about 4-week course every
who
month.
is the we? What platform or what school or what's the setup?
Yeah, so I own an organization called H&Co, and I've co-creator, my other co-creator, Barry Taylor, who you know well, and we talked about earlier on. And we do a few things at H&Co. First, H&Co is all about embracing faith and the complexities and what it means to be human in the 21st century. And so Barry and I have been doing this work together for a lot of years. And early 2021, we decided to branch out on our own and start our own new thing. And of course, the pandemic hit, the worst time to start, essentially what is a new business. But we run cohorts for church leaders and seminarians who need their education desperately, supplemented, and Christians who are just struggling, amidst trying to navigate belief. We do these cohorts called Field Guide for the Future. We just started, and we do those like 3 times a year. We talk about culture, we talk about what we call innovative theology, we talk about methodology, we talk about the future. And then we just started a brand new cohort, which will also run a couple of times a year. We're in the midst of it right now, called Future Proof, a roadmap through pandemic and beyond. And then we have these culture courses that we do every month. So the one we did last was called Shameful. The impossibility, or something about sex being impossible. I can't remember the little byline we had on it. But essentially, cultural theory is really important to the work that we do, because for too long, Christianity has just happened outside of culture and in a world of its own. It's just been inoculated from everything in a very not cool way. And so we don't talk about culture to be relevant. We talk about culture to talk about meaning, in the social locations in which we live.
Yeah.
And are constructed, in which our gods are constructed as well. So yeah, that's what we do. We're expanding a lot. In the new year, we are wanting to launch what we're calling, well, I don't know if we'll call it this in the new year, but essentially it's theological coaching. And it's for all of those people who send me all those messages, being afraid about hell and having like all of this trauma, and trying to sort of coach them through a theology that they can believe in, get on board with, having an intellectual faith,
Yes.
or an intelligent faith, I should say,
Yes.
a sense of intelligent belief. I hate the word belief, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean. So basically, we try and help people hold all of these things in tension. And, something like religion, and especially Christianity, which has been so built on the basis of certainty, and certainty has just crumbled. If the pandemic has
Right.
shown us anything, it's
Yeah.
shown us that.
Yeah.
So how to really engage your faith and engage your Christianity in times that will always be, now at this point, uncertain.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was there a time when you were making this sort of these forays of questioning the the environment that you were in? Was there a moment that hit you, or was there an event in life, a loss that started to kind of prick and tickle your intellect, but also in relationship to the heart, in relationship to the emotions, the affect? Were there punctiliar times that you experienced? I'll give you an example. For me, I remember being an undergrad. I was at Oxford studying with Richard Swinburne,
Mm.
so I was really into the analytic philosophy of religion and the coherence of God. And Swinburne's take was, it's more rational than not to believe in God, because if you take a p-inductive argument of all these kinds of separate pieces of evidence and you stack them up, then over that really gets you over the threshold into the more rational belief that there is a God, right? And so I was interested in that, and I studied it and knew it well, right? But then I transferred to Calvin to finish up my
Mhm.
undergrad, and I'm doing philosophy at Calvin College, which is sort of
Mhm.
like one of the main places to do Christian philosophy, right?
Yes.
And what happened is that my firstborn son was born so prematurely that it wasn't clear if he was going to make it for some time. And so here I had this intellectual apparatus that functioned, that gave me the rational belief that God exists. And at the same time, my son, my firstborn son, might not live.
Mhm.
And how do you put those things together? It just seemed to me the head and the heart were so separate, so far removed from each other, that I had to figure out and reconcile this. And this is when, and this is the punctiliar moment that happened to me. This is when a friend of mine, we were in this what we call beer and truth club at Calvin. So we would go have beer and talk about philosophy and God and whatever on
Yeah.
Thursday nights. It was cool. But Michael Wassenaar gave me this article about Derrida,
Mhm.
and he says, "You should read this." And I was like, okay. So I read it, and suddenly that Derrida is talking about ways that language functions in a way that connects up with beauty, the aesthetic,
Mhm.
beautiful swings of sentences that connect with your emotions. And I'm just like, wait, this is interesting. And that started me down that road for me. And I wonder if there was such a moment in your time, in your life, that you sort of started to picking up these kinds of deconstructionists, or these kinds of people that go counterwise than just simply the R.C. Sproul's, let's say, of the Christian religion.
Yeah. Yeah. Another really great question. Another huge question.
Yeah,
Um,
sorry.
I think a lot of people, their deconstruction starts because of like one big event that really makes them question the validity and the sense of their faith. For me, my life, I mean, it's definitely not been easy. And I have a story like anybody else that's filled with pain and, broken hearts and dysfunction and all sorts of things. But for me, it was just like a natural, maybe disintegration of a particular construct or a movement
Mm.
away from it. And it was filled by kind of, I guess, new understandings of what it all could be and all could mean. And so Barry and I talk about this a lot, this word deconstruction. And, obviously, with Derrida and kind of moving on, but essentially what it means at the moment for a lot of people who are really bitter and angry and unhappy with the baggage that they've had to leave the church with. And it kind of stops there, it seems, at a popular level. But maybe, perhaps, a de-evolution of those constructs of faith, or even, I would say, devaluing of certain things, because I started to kind of move supernaturalism and metaphysicality and ontological being kind of down the rungs. And I started raising up other things in its place to where empirical reality, and this really comes out of my hermeneutics and literary theory study years ago, is that empirical realities became way less important than theological ones. And those were the ones that I was really concerned with. That's where I really believe that transformation happens. And so people try and, you know, get me stuck in a line of questioning about, empirical. Well, do you believe Jesus is the Son of God? Do you believe the virgin birth? The biggest one, do you believe in a physical, literal resurrection of Christ? I'm like, I can tell you way more than you know about the resurrection of Christ, but I'm never going to answer whether or not I believe in it literally or not, because frankly, it's none of your business.
Right. Right.
That's a private concern of mine.
Sure.
How I interact with who you believe Jesus Christ to be is my own business and not yours. And you mostly should be concerned with what's happening, outward on the outside, how my belief or whatnot is contributing to community and the betterment of it. But those things are not important. It doesn't make any difference to the thing that you're saying I have belief in or not. Like, it doesn't do anything to the thing I might believe in, and it doesn't really do anything to me.
Right.
Now, how it might transform me and, what's happening theologically in that story is what really matters. So, and I also had like the huge magical privilege somehow in my life. A few years ago, I got an opportunity to go live in the south of France for a year and a half.
Wow.
And just a break from life, I needed a huge break from theology. It was like too much. I just needed to get out of a lot of stuff that I felt was like sticky paper, like a fly on sticky paper. And I did. And while I was there, I did a lot. I rested a lot. And then I started to read some new things. Again, I read a lot.
Where in the south of France? Were you on the Riviera? Where did you end up?
Yeah, kind of. I lived in a little village called Saint-Genès, which is in the Alpes Maritimes. So it's very close to Vence and Saint Paul de Vence.
Wow.
Just 20 minutes north of Nice in the hills. So
Riviera, that's lovely.
My stomping ground. And I'll just I'm gonna sound like such a snob, but I had this beach that I would go to in Saint-Tropez all the time. It wasn't like the main beach, Pamplon, but there's a little beach for those of you who go or who want to go called oh my God, it's my favorite beach in the world, and that's eluding me.
And it's right by Nice. It's close to Nice.
It's in Saint-Tropez.
Okay.
Oh my God. I'm sorry. I say this beach all the time. I don't know why. But anyway,
a lot of retired spies go down there and live out. I know Graham Greene, for example, lived near there, and when he was, the great writer Graham Greene, the novelist. And there's a lot of interesting people that end up there for some reason, and it's obvious because it's beautiful and it's lovely.
Plage des Salins. That's it. Salins.
Salins.
Yeah. Plage des Salins. Because it doesn't have all the beach clubs and all the party places. It's just, you just go and you sit and it's beautiful. Wow. Yeah. So Monaco's very close by and the Italian Riviera. So it was like that whole area just available by train and just wonderful. And it was just such a rejuvenation. I did so much travel during that time. I went to Thailand for 3 weeks. I had friends who owned a place in Seychelles. I went there for 3 weeks. It's like, and I don't even know. It's like, I don't know what I want to say about magic and alchemy in the world. I really don't. But it's times like that where you have to think, well, what's happening around me that is
absolutely
creating the spin that I'm in,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's really quite the journey. And it just seems like you're real. You come across as being super real when it comes to, living out life honestly and not sort of just obeying a dogma because the previous generations or the white patriarchs tell you to. And it just seems like it's dynamic and alive. I mean, personally for me, I walked away from the Christian faith 10-12 years ago, and 10 years ago, I guess, and I really haven't been around, haven't had conversations like this. I did my PhD and working with Zizek and Milbank, the great English theologian. And after I did that, I was just kind of like, okay, I've done the theological, philosophical thing, and sort of moved on in a way. And, but yeah, it's really honest, and it's great to be able to talk to somebody like that rather than just here's my here's my exact answer, my catechistic answer to your question about salvation or
Yeah.
whatever.
And I could do that with you, but it would be so boring.
Oh, it is boring. I actually find it somewhat violent in a way. Now, I'll
Yeah.
explain. You know, if you before, you know, you, when I was in Christian circles and I was thinking about ordination, there's always these questions that people you would ask each other, almost like dogs sniffing each other's asses at the dog park. And
Totally.
you're realizing, you know, you realize they want to put you into a box so they know what to do with you.
Yeah.
Are you friend or foe? And you know, it goes all the way back to the salute when you or wave when you salute somebody in the military. You open up your palm to show, hey, I don't mean harm. I don't have a weapon here. And when people meet each other, it's like, what are they about? And you got to get to know them. So if you can theologically place them in a category, you
Yeah.
know at least where they belong and how you relate to them, rather than the risk and the dynatism that comes with actually sitting down, breaking bread with somebody, maybe being offended by how they smell or what they say or who they believe in, but being able to walk that journey in a way that doesn't go back to that fear factor that we were talking about. Like, where do I place this other person? How do I other them?
Mhm.
And yeah, so I found that after leaving the faith, it was much easier for me just to listen. Okay, I talk a lot, you know, but to listen to people's stories. And that's the thing. It's like what you were saying about narrative. Stories are unique and they're precious. They're uncommon, and everybody has their own unique story. And if you can listen to what they're saying and what their story is, I think you grow inside. It's like reading a wonderful novel.
Yeah. Well, it's your subjectivity and your reality, being enacted upon and informed by someone else's subjectivity and reality. And you're creating all these little stories. And that's not just like a nice way and, of talking about something. I mean, it's neurological. These things actually have a physiological fingerprint.
Yeah.
If you know anything about neuroscience, and I'm sure you do, you know that every time we have a new experience, it's a new synapses kind of built over an old one. And when I talk about Catherine Malibu and Jeffrey Robbins and plasticity of God, it's like, I remember first hearing about this stuff, and I was like, wow, okay. So when I'm being very biblical too in this in this
That's
podcast.
great.
I'm
You
not
can do
normally this
whatever.
Bible-y,
Yeah.
but I remember kind of being pointed back to Paul and, Romans, and this idea of being transformed by the renewing of your mind. And it's like, oh, that's not just like a nice spiritual idiom. That's actually a
Mhm.
physiological reality. We can actually transform our minds by
Yeah.
new stories. And these things only happen in community. Louis Cozolino, in his book, Social Brain, he talks about how the plasticity of our brain is actually only possible as a result of our environment and activated social stimuli. It is not an internal cerebral process.
Really? That's fascinating
Yeah,
thesis.
it's
What a
it's
surprise.
incredible. So like you can heal brain trauma, you can heal brain injury,
Wow.
all of these things by understanding plasticity and how these things work.
Wow.
And that's all narrative. And
Yes.
that is the power of story. That is the power of narrative. It's not because everywhere you look, you hear story, and it's like, what do you even mean? Like, are you just trying to be cool? Like, are you like the
Right.
cool worship leader
Right.
with like the t-shirt and the tattoos who's talking about story because it's cool, but you're still like using these really old ideas. But
Yeah.
story is a really powerful tool on so many levels, and it's why I've
Yeah.
just fallen in love with it and been absolutely enchanted by it from the
That's
beginning.
amazing. Well, it reminds me of the quotidian, uh, ev- what happens chemically in the brain when you say pet a dog or pet a cat. You know,
Mhm.
the endorphins are released because if you're petting, you're showing empathy. You have a tactile connection with
Mhm.
a creature, and that creates those, what you were saying, those different channels in the brain and those neurons firing in different ways. And I find that traveling, like you travel a lot, I travel a lot. Traveling also creates that sense of like, wait, my master narrative of life is problematized when I go and smell different smells in different marketplaces and eat different cuisines and hear why, in India they burn their spouse when they die. Like, or okay, that's an extreme example, but you get the idea.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you're constantly, as you travel, you're constantly recreating circuits in your
You are.
brain.
You are.
transforming.
And you're seeing that you're probably smaller than you thought. And I always tell people, when I'm teaching, we really have to walk with a certain level of theological and spiritual humility, hermeneutical humility, if you will,
Mhm. Yeah.
because we just don't know the half of it. And so, I'm always reading, I'm always like learning something new. But the more I learn, the more I realize that the more I attempt to know, the less I actually do know. And I
Yeah.
prefer it that way. I really like it that way.
Yes.
But it's just really good for the soul
Well,
and
it
just
reminds me of Gadamer's. It reminds me of Gadamer's Truth and Method, where he's talking about being caught up short, desacha, and the idea is that you'll never get the meaning of a text that you're trying to engage in if you don't loosen up and and risk letting go of the way you think this text should read, and let the text itself sort of call you up short
Mm.
to stun you. And it's at that moment when you suddenly enter into a different horizon, is what he calls it, the hermeneutical horizon.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that. I
Me,
just love that. I also like how he begins Truth and Method, the big tome of hermeneutics. If you haven't looked at it, just have a check,
it's been
because
years since I've read Truth and Method, so you'll
it's,
have to remind me.
I remember reading it at Yale when I was taking a hermeneutics class with Nicholas Walterstorff.
Yeah.
And I love the imagery. He begins this Truth and Method with playing tennis. And the idea is, if you play tennis, okay, I'm sorry if you don't, but and I don't really play tennis either, but ping pong or whatever, but you're playing this tennis game, and after a couple volleys back and forth, you realize that it's not you playing tennis as much as the game itself playing you. In
Mm.
other words, like you get thrown off that, what you were saying, that master position, like
Mhm.
I'm in charge, and
Yeah.
you get put into a larger contextual moment, and therefore it's like being listening to a beautiful song in a church, where you get taken away, and you realize you're suddenly part of something much bigger than yourself. And I love that moment. This is what happens when you fall in love. I
Yeah.
mean, that's why they call it amore, right? The morals of society, you're supposed to follow society, but love is amore. It's
Side
like
of it.
the
Yeah.
of the morals of social expectation. I love that, because love is somewhat like a fucked up mechanism that says to society, no, it's not that way. It's
Yeah.
this incredible moment with someone else that
Yeah.
is completely a different universe. This is why Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, they're just so beautiful, these stories. And
Yeah.
it sounds to me like you're in that moment in your life now, and that's really cool.
I am absolutely. It's funny. I've been really lucky in love the last several years. I've dated some really amazing people and have had some fabulous partners and some fabulous experiences out in the world in relationships and in love.
Yeah,
And then they ended. And I don't think, I don't know about you, but I don't tend to enter a relationship thinking, okay, is this going to end up with marriage and the one? I don't even really think I believe
yeah,
in one and all of those things.
yeah,
But we learn so much from just being vulnerable in relationship and from being, and you're in the moment. You're not thinking of like what the future is holding, and are
yeah,
we going to together, are we getting married, are we gonna have all of
yeah,
those things.
yeah.
Simon, my betrothed, my husband to
Nice.
be, it was very, very different with him, and I was in a different place, and it
Mm,
felt really good to be so sure that this was what I wanted.
yeah.
But
Nice.
yeah, being in love is an incredible thing. It's
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm
yeah,
I'm like that diehard romantic for real. Like, for me, it's definitely looking for the one, and I think that's a kind of a setup in a way that it secretly and unconsciously subverts the very attempt itself. So, but I'm living a life I like doing, with or without someone. Who knows? But
yeah.
it's
No,
hard.
it is hard. And I think for me, I always had dreams of like meeting the perfect partner. And I had ideas and I had qualities that I desired, and I had like a list and things like that. So maybe in that sense it was like the one, but not that there was like this kind of pre-planned, predestined
Yeah.
maybe person out there.
Template.
But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But this is like this is what it needs to be in order for me to kind of
Yeah.
sign on. And I feel so lucky with Simon because, you know, he has all of those things, but he created some other things on that list for me that I didn't even know that I.
That's cool. That's really great when a partner can stretch you and move you into that Gadameria next horizon level of like depth, and that's wonderful.
Well, and you have an incredible life, so you probably have a similar desire of like, if you're going to be with someone, it's going to be because they make your already incredible life better. Like I was really happy alone.
Yeah, that's
I was
right.
fulfilled, you know. So
Yeah,
to
that's a
meet
good
someone,
place to be,
yeah,
especially as a woman in a
yeah,
patriarchal setup. You know, for you to be that and to come to terms with yourself being okay, just being you without a partner, that's actually a rare, I think it's pretty rare to have. I don't
maybe,
know, in my
yeah.
experience, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know that like I knew because again, if I hadn't maybe been married the first time around and if it wasn't
Yeah.
like such a train wreck, maybe it would have been different. But I was so happy with my freedom, living alone, supporting
Yeah.
myself, going wherever I wanted, buying things
Yeah.
that I wanted, using my money the way I wanted, you know.
Yeah.
It's such
Exactly.
freedom that if you're
Yeah.
going to add someone else to that mix in a way where you're partnering forever, it's like you've got to be so amazing. You've got to make my life so much better.
No, that's a good way to put it. Wow. Yeah.
It
Wow.
does, you know, he's
You
just
wonder
absolutely
how, if
incredible.
this Simon person is supernatural.
He
He
is such.
probably is to you for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of talk about him in terms of, you know, he's for me, he's just an absolutely singular person,
Wow.
a singular
That's
man.
incredible.
So
I like that. That's really great. Well, it's been a pleasure having a
so,
good conversation with you, weaving in and out all kinds of things from Christianity, post-Christianity, evangelicalism, post-evangelicalism, the platforms you do, the travels you've made, and I'm sure there's many more ahead. And
mhm.
and I just it's wonderful. Thank you for spending the hour with me.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. It was good.
Super.
You're a good conversation partner. We have good chemistry. We should do this again.
Yeah, I mean it's great, and I love to have actually teaching spaces where it's less. Here's the 5 things I need to get across to this so-called students in this next 50-minute lecture or time, rather to sort of like you set it up and you unleash. You wind up whatever it might be with different possibilities and anecdotes, stories, conversation pieces, and then just see where it goes. For me, that's beautiful to learn in those kind of ways. So
Yeah,
I
we've been
appreciate
on
it.
a little adventure in this last hour.
Totally, it's been
We
great.
we should
Only
have you on
having
our
good-
Sacred Anarchies pod. We have a pod. I don't know if I told you or if you know, we have a podcast called Sacred Anarchies, a post-church podcast.
Wow, no,
We haven't had a guest yet. We launched in July, and there are these like it's like little 10 to 20-minute conversations between Barry and myself every week.
that
Could
sounds
be our first guest.
fascinating.
Oh, we have fun.
I'll come and join you guys sometime.
We love it.
Okay, sounds good. Well, take care and thanks again.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. Talk to you soon.
You were